Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stress Free IEP, the show where we help families build their village so they can raise their neurodivergent children with confidence, clarity, and support. I'm your host, Frances Schefter, special education attorney, advocate, and a fellow parent walking this journey with you. Each week, we shine a light on professionals, services, and real world strategies that support your child both inside and outside of school. From navigating the IEP process to finding the right providers in your community, we're here to help you connect We're here to help you connect the dots and feel empowered every step of the way. Whether you're joining us live on Facebook or YouTube or listening later on your favorite podcast app, we are so glad you're here. So let's dive in and meet today's amazing guest. Sean McCormick is a former public school special education teacher and the founder of Executive Functioning Specialists, a coaching company for students who want to develop better executive functioning skills, as well as the co-founder of Upskill Specialists, which is a coaching company for neurodivergent adults. And he is the program developer for Neurodivergent, which is a popular conference for the neurodivergent community. He has also founded and runs training support for transitioning special educators through the Executive Functioning Coaching Academy. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frances. I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad we were able to make this happen, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for taking busy time. You sound like as crazy busy as me with all the things you're into and involved in.
Yes, yeah. Well, ADHD is a superpower, but it can also be a challenge. And I've started a lot of stuff since leaving the classroom, which I'm proud of, but it's a lot to manage. And having children, it sounds like, yeah, you have children as well. I got 2 little girls, ages 6 and 3. So keep, juggling it all.
Yep. I have mine are 8 and 12.
Okay.
So yeah, I get to go to outdoor ed tomorrow with my sixth grader. So
fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm a little nervous because camping's not my thing, but yeah, it'll be fun.
Is it an actual sleepaway? Like you're gonna camp?
It is for 2 nights. Yep.
That's a commitment. That's great. That'll be an experience.
Yeah, it will be an experience. So executive functioning skills, people understand what they are, but don't fully understand. So what are executive functioning skills and why are they so important?
Yeah. So my favorite definition of it is by Dr. Russell Barkley. He says executive functioning is self-direction towards a future goal. And then someone I admire, Tara Sumter, who's a speech language pathologist, she talks about in order to self-direct, we need self-awareness. So I think it's a kind of like not a spectrum, but a continuum where you start with the self-awareness. If you have self-awareness, then you can self-direct towards something. From self-direction, we need some type of vision or goal that is clear that we are moving towards. And I think what a lot of students struggle with, what a lot of parents and educators struggle with is how do we get clear on the goals and then also, or, the direction that we're moving towards, and how do we motivate students or help them self-motivate, I'll say, because it's less about us motivating them and more about helping them see it's in their best interest. So they executively decide to engage. So long story short, executive functioning is basically the ability to identify a future outcome and take action towards it while navigating obstacles that may come up, whether internally or externally.
And, what are the risks if we don't help our students figure this out? Because I'm thinking about it in school, what's the goal to get through school, right? Obviously, there's more specifics, but our younger kids, what happens if we don't help them develop these skills?
The research is pretty clear that kids, and one of the main components of executive functioning is self-regulation. So if you can't self-regulate in service of the goal or the vision, then it's very difficult to achieve it. And a lack of self-regulation, we're all familiar with teens who are spending too much time on their phone or engaging in drugs or alcohol or whatever it might be that's distracting them from the life outcomes they probably want to achieve in a more core sense, rather like I don't think anyone really wants to be doing things that are harming them, self-harming them, but they don't know how to self-regulate in a way that, it's difficult to self-regulate. It takes work, it takes skill. So the risks, I think, are if we don't learn these skills. For example, there was a study done in England started in the 1970s, and it looked at children. I think it was, very young children under 10 years old for 30 years. It was a 30-year study, and it identified that the kids who had poorer self-regulation skills at below age 10, 30 years later had greater risk of drug use, greater risk of like they were socioeconomically lower. They had like higher crime rates, like all types of negative outcomes were associated with the reduced self-regulatory skills. There's also been another study called the marshmallow test, where they showed that kids who were able to basically like refrain from eating the marshmallow and wait for a second marshmallow, like later on, those kids had better ability to inhibit or pause and work towards like not immediate consequence outcomes, like longer term outcomes. So all the research shows that people who develop these skills end up having better overall life outcomes, even when controlling for like IQ, gender, racial class, like all those things, or race, social class, all those things. They've shown that these skills really do truly impact the lives of people.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that, the long-term effects, but it makes sense because
Mhm.
either you're learning how to self-regulate and function or you're not. And if
Mhm.
you're not, then where are you as an adult? So like what can parents do? Because of course, I mean, in my world, we have the IEP and we put all these executive functioning things on the IEP. And in the perfect, beautiful world, if, as you know, as a former teacher, all the funding was there and the teachers had all the support they could, they'd be able to teach all of these skills. But in reality, we know schools do the best they can with what they have. How can parents help ensure these kids are developing the skills?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't think there's a perfect answer for everybody, but I will share some things that work from my experience in terms of my experience in public school special education and working with hundreds of families as a coach. And so first off, we want to go to the research, and the research by I think the best research on what really helps students is done by this guy, Dr. John Hattie, who wrote the book Visible Learning. And this book has encompassed over 300 million students globally. I think it captured over 800 meta analyses of studies looking at studies. They've actually basically turn this into a searchable database where you can control for like what has the greatest impact, how many studies did it have. So this is something anyone can look up or check out his book. But in there, he's identified certain things that have the biggest impact on student success. So, for example, one of the biggest factors is called collective efficacy, which is a team's ability to identify the goal that they are working towards for a student and then work together towards that goal. So that is the fundamental purpose of an IEP, is to establish collective efficacy around a shared set of goals. Now, I'm sure, Francis, as you know, many times it actually has the reverse process where the goals are just copied and pasted. There's no actual implementation plan. But if there is a real process, which is what I've developed, when I worked in the school system, we had an organization that would push into my classroom for my classroom was what was known as a counseling enriched classroom. And so we had kids coming back from residential treatment who had maybe jumped between multiple schools, nothing had worked. And so we actually had to have a separate organization come in and run this process called the family team meeting. And the family team meeting was the most simple process in theory, but it does take skill to run it, which is what's going well, what's not going well, what's one thing the whole team is working on between now and next month's family team meeting. And so if you have some type of real process rather than the dog and pony show, which sometimes becomes the IEP process, unfortunately, like I would love for it to be better. I've ran tons of IEPs, but unfortunately, just because of different factors that come into place, it is not always truly effective. Then you can have a great chance at impacting a student. So that collective efficacy piece is huge. One of the second most impactful factors is called teacher estimates of achievement. And this can apply to parents, can apply to educators, coaches, anyone who's working with the student. And the idea here is that, does the educator understand what's in what's called the student's zone of proximal development? So most people either put things that are too difficult for the student or too easy and not challenging enough. But what happens is either the student avoids it because it's too difficult, or it's so easy that it's like it doesn't challenge them to develop or grow in any way. The skilled educator, parent, coach, whatever it might be, knows how to place goals and challenges within that zone of proximal development where it's difficult enough that they need to ask for help, but not so easy that they could do it independently. And then they provide scaffolds and supports. So if you can leverage those approaches, you have a really good chance at setting a student up to be effectively self-regulated, to develop those skills, to transition into higher order challenges throughout the lifespan. So those are two big ones. I could keep going, but I'll just share.
No, it's great. And the team meetings, I would love that with the school system. I used to do more, but a lot of work with abuse and neglect system as a special ed attorney and as a GAL. And as the youth get older, they have these meetings, family team meetings, although they're not called FTMs anymore. I don't remember what they're called, but they have, I think they're YTP, youth transition meetings where we talk about the youth. The youth is supposed to be there. Like, what are their goals? Are they going to be adopted? Are they going to guardianship? Are they going to, go, independent living? What are their goals? And then what are the areas that the team needs to support the children?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that can be really powerful if it's done as a true like commitment, and rather less of like, we have to do this. And it's like Marshawn Lynch, like, I'm just here because, I'm going to get fined if I'm, not. It's like, we don't want that energy. We need like, what are we doing to help this student transition effectively? And if that level of engagement and commitment occurs, it's really like, I've seen kids who were completely disengaged from school, who were, not attending, go to like being motivated to graduate when they see that a group of people is dedicated to their support. You do have to set it up in a way where this child is at the focus of it, so that they're being like, is this reasonable to you? Are you willing to try this? Are you willing to like take steps? Like, they have to be bought in. And that probably goes back to the strategy that is probably most effective with students, or one of the top strategies, is that reflexive questioning. Some people call it motivational interviewing. Some people call it solution focused prompting. Ultimately, it's basically placing things, inquiry based approach with students, where you're like questioning and asking them to consider things and trying to get them to buy in rather than telling them what to do, which has a negative effect on executive functioning, because they're not thinking, you're telling them what to do, and therefore they're just like little robots.
That makes so much sense. I'm just thinking about the transition plan in the IEPs that is often very neglected. And people pull the goals into the transition plan instead of developing a goal that's the goal for the transition plan. Now, at least in Maryland, that's how they do it. And I'm just thinking of the kids, especially like when I think back to my abuse and neglect kids, that are, most of them at a certain age, are checked out because they've just been failed throughout their lives and school hasn't been any better. Of like, what's your goal? Who do you want to be when you grow up? What do you envision? And then reverse engineering it. So like we have kids that say, I want to be a nurse. Okay, so what do we need to do to be a nurse? And not us, like, as you said, not us as the adults saying, well, then you have to get good grades and go to college.
Right.
To them, getting good grades and going to college is just too much. Whereas if you come back and like, okay, let's look at step by step. We need to pass all these classes, and then, do the task analysis, do the breakdown to what they need, so that they see the goal and they can see the actionable steps that they're taking to get there. And I know for a lot of our kids, the why, because we get that often with our high school kids. Why do I have to do this? Why is this important?
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy or point there. Is I always talk about what you just said, for example, becoming a nurse. I talk about that being the light at the end of the tunnel for a student. And if we don't have a light at the end of the tunnel, school is going to feel like a slog. It's going to feel just overwhelming and pointless. And students are going to say, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do this? they don't, they always, students often say that. I remember that question would come up all the time. And so if you can help establish that at the beginning, like, what's your why for going to school? Like, oh, well, why are you here? Why is this important to you? Oh, I want to be a nurse. Okay, why do you want to be a nurse? I want to help people and I want to move out of my house. Okay, great. So now we're a freshman in high school and you don't like chemistry. Is this chemistry class, do you have to pass this in order to be a nurse one day? Oh, I'm not sure. Why don't we look it up? Is passing chemistry, high school chemistry, an essential requirement to entering this program, this local community college program? And if you can help them be curious, I mean, and it's easier now than ever to make that connection with ChatGPT or something. You could be like, you say you want to be a nurse. Okay, let's find out if what you're doing right now is essential. And if not, let's come up with another plan, right? Let's work together to make sure your plan is individualized towards your goal. Of course, you want to be thoughtful here in terms of thinking about how you're approaching minors with these conversations in terms of what their parents' expectations and requirements are.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we need the student bought in. Otherwise, they're just going to dig their heels in. And kids are really good at digging their heels, and they're pros.
Oh, yeah.
They're better than anybody. So getting their buy-in in some way is so essential to this. And that's where people ask me, how do I motivate kids? And it's less about you rah getting, saying anything inspiring, and more about you helping them tether the daily behaviors to the long-term outcomes that they value. And one way to do this effectively is when they say, I want to be a nurse, or I want to be in the NFL, or whatever it might be, say, how would it feel to be on the field playing in the NFL, or how would it feel to be in the hospital working with someone who's struggling? And they'll go, oh, it feels so powerful, right? And what's happening there is they were primarily intellectually engaging with their goal when they identified the thing that they wanted. But when you ask them how it would feel, then they start to connect it to their nonverbal memory, which actually plants in what's known the reticular activating system, where then they start to pick up on things in their environment that will help them reach that goal. People, things, cues. That's where you help them actually connect with the goal in a more deeper, profound way than just intellectually considering it.
That is like, this is the first time I'm hearing things like this. Like, it's just so amazing. It's so true. Getting the kids buy-in, like, we know that. And the one thing that's sticking with me the most is, like, we can't motivate somebody else to do something.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing that's an external.
Yeah.
It's if a child, an adult. I mean, we all say it for adults with addictions. They have to want it themselves, or it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing for a child to reach goals and objectives. Like, if they don't want it, they're not going to do it. If they don't see the why, they're not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, as you just said, let's connect it to their goals of what they want. So now they understand the why and make it work. Like, you have to we know you have to graduate high school. Unfortunately, the state says these are the things you have to do to graduate high school. So do you have to straight A them all? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do what we have to do to get through, and then, focus on the ones that matter more.
Yeah.
One of the things I hate is the focus we have on everybody should get straight A's in everything, because it's just, it's not realistic.
Yeah. And it's not necessary as well. Ultimately, goals, it's less about winning every battle and more about winning the war. When we think about executive functioning, because executive functioning is not about perfection or even doing to-dos. In fact, to-dos can be a distraction from true executive functioning. True executive functioning is having something down the road or in the future that you cannot do it in the moment. And so you have to consciously eliminate everything that would prevent you from staying focused on that. That's what true executive functioning is it's the ability to, and this is something unique to humans, is that we can visualize a future that does not exist, and we can map out a pathway there, and then we can navigate obstacles. And this is something as far as I understand, other animals on Earth or in the universe, I guess I'll just say on Earth because I don't know what else is in the universe, but on Earth don't have the ability to do is identify something 10 years, 5 years down the road. Now, students are not going to be able to do this. Their executive functioning is still developing. So most students, their executive function brain basically, or aspects of their brain, aren't fully developed until late 20s, early 30s, most likely. So, you don't have to necessarily, they don't have to have a fully fleshed out, perfect, like, here's exactly what I'm doing in my life, but they do need to have some type of light at the end of the tunnel or intent. And then they have to think about And that's where the teacher estimates achievement, the factor I was sharing about earlier, being able to understand how their brain works and then kind of like nourish and encourage them, nourish. I don't even know what I was saying there. Encourage them towards that is what's going to have the biggest impact on their lives.
So, like, I'm thinking, like, oh, this is so cool for our high school kids and maybe even middle school, but like our elementary kids, what
Yeah.
do they want to be when they grow up?
Yeah.
Ballerina, how do we bring that down to them? Because
Hmm.
what I'm thinking is like my 8-year-old, like, she doesn't know what she wants to be when she grows up. And like,
Right.
she can't, like, that's so far away. It's
Totally.
not. So, like, how do we get her to work on her executive functioning skills?
Yeah, I think it's all like always scaling it back. So when we get down to younger kids who have no real capacity to, there are exceptions, of course. Every child is different, but for the most part, very young children have no capacity to envision their future. That part of their brain is not developed almost at all. So for them, the most important thing is learning how to stay regulated and learning how to manage big feelings. And so helping them develop strategies, systems, for example, my daughter, she created, we talk about this. We're like, okay, when you get overwhelmed, like, what are we going to do? And we talk about it when she's regulated. So she's like, well, I could make, her idea recently was to make a calm down box. So she took a little box, she put little things that she likes. And then I said, okay, so when you're feeling frustrated, like, how should I remind you, or what should I do to, like, help you go back to your calm down box? And she, she gave me some language for it. And does it work every time? No, but it's like building the roof before it's raining. Like, let's kind of come up with plans. We know that dysregulation is going to happen. How are we building systems and supports, testing them, and then revising or adjusting? And so that's where I think you start with really young children. With an 8-year-old, of course, they're kind of moving into a little more clarity, but maybe you start with like smaller, things like, oh, like, what would you love to do by the end of the semester? Okay, what are things you have to do each day? And then even having things that, as part of when we're talking about behavior change or helping them develop skills, there's a thing called IC, which is immediate consequences. And it's for both good and negative behaviors. So if they're doing something well, trying to immediately like reinforce that through verbal praise. I talk about behavior specific verbal praise. Those are things that can like start to reinforce like skills and regulatory behaviors that would encourage that with those age group students.
Yeah, I like that. The, behavior specific. It just went, "Ooh, that's how we should be wording this on the IEPs in the
Yeah, behavior
clarified
specific praise.
location."
That's what I wrote my master's thesis at Buffalo State when I got my master's in special education. I wrote the impact of behavior specific praise on native. I was working at a school for non-English speaking students. So the impact of behavior specific praise delivered in a student's native language. And I did find through my research that does have a positive impact more than generalized praise. Like when they hear the specific praise, it does improve outcomes.
That's, I like that because 'cause I'm thinking about it like, "Good job." Okay, good job at what? What was I just doing? Our
Right, right.
ADHD kids aren't gonna remember sometimes
Yeah.
or,
Praise the
you know
process. The process.
exactly, whereas, like,
Yeah.
"Good job, I love how you got started right away." And
Mhm.
then they're
Exactly.
connecting, "This is what I'm supposed to do."
Yeah. Another really useful technique that parents can use is what's called the trial yes. So when, let's say you want a student to start their homework or you want them to engage in a non-preferred behavior, you could say something like, "Hey, do you want to show me your favorite YouTube video?" Right? And they'll go, "Yeah." And then you go, "Okay, well, would it make sense for us to work on homework for 20 minutes and then you can show me that?" So you get a small buy-in to something small, or you get a small buy-in to something, and then you insert the desired like activity first, and they might negotiate. They might be like, "I can do it for 15 minutes." Okay, let's do 15 minutes, right? They weren't going to do it anyways. So now you've kind of got them to buy in. You can watch 3 minutes of a whatever K-pop Demon Hunter video, and you've got them to start their math homework. So the trial yes is a really effective tool in any scenario, getting a small buy-in, which leads to a larger buy-in.
Right. That is so awesome. That because I'm thinking again, like, of course, my brain goes back to IEPs and things like that, and we do the first then language, and it's usually us as the parents or the teachers or the adults saying, "First, you have to do this, and then you can do that,"
Hmm.
rather than flipping that around and
Hmm.
saying, Okay, yeah, I understand you wanna play with the blocks. Does it should we try to do this first? Can we do it for
Mhm.
this amount? Wow, that just makes so much sense to get their buy-in, of them
Mhm.
telling you what they're willing to do.
Yeah, yeah. Because what happens there is there's a concept called the effective filter, and students put up a barrier, and they don't want to learn from anything or anyone around them. And it's like, I'm not doing it. And so the effective filter is lowered when they have a sense of basically ownership over the scenario, and you can help them experience that ownership by getting a small buy-in to something, which lowers the effective filter, and now they are receptive to ideas or requests.
Yeah, that's so cool. Sorry, it's just like it's so funny because I've been doing this for how many years, and I've had people on for executive functioning, and people are always like, "Well, how do you have more than one coach for executive functioning?" And I'm like, "You'd be surprised how different each is, And that goes back to, like I say, when people ask me, "Oh, can you recommend an executive functioning coach?" I always want to know, well, what's the diagnosis? Do you want to prefer a male
Mm.
or a female? Do you prefer this? Do you prefer that? Because each has their own specialty, and it's so
Totally.
important.
Yeah, and there's so many different approaches to this, right? So some people think the priority with executive functioning is to have a prescribed, here's how to use Google Calendar, here's what you do, and that works for some kids, right? Maybe the more neurotypical learner, but for the neurodivergent learner who needs that level of stimulation or ownership, or they kind of put up barriers, you need other strategies. So it's better probably to have a range of approaches, or a framework in terms of how you approach it, rather than like this is the only way, because there's, as they say, there's many paths to the truth.
Right. So I'm just thinking about like the task analysis is, one that everybody puts on IEPs nowadays. But if I'm hearing you right, it shouldn't be the teacher doing the task analysis for the child. It should be the teacher and the child going through the task analysis so that we're showing the child how it's done versus just doing it for them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say this is the way in all scenarios, because some students do actually need really specific instructions, and that's going to make more sense in their brain. I'm thinking about certain autistic students that I've worked with where clarity on steps can be really valuable. Um, and, that's not the case for every autistic student, but that may be the case for some students. So, and it also depends on the goal, because, for example, if we're talking about an executive functioning goal, um, it might be best for them to help develop a process for checking their assignments each day. And they come up with that process and, utilize it 3 out of 5 days a week with 80% accuracy. So maybe that's like a great goal for a student who's going to feel motivated by that. Other students, may really value a preset task analyzed process that makes sense for their specific development. And I would base that on the assessment and what is the neuropsychologist or school assessment professional, if it's done properly, saying about what's best for the child. Because ultimately we do, I always think needs are driven by the assessment, needs drive goals, goals drive services. And so that's my approach, is trying to look at it independently. But I would say best practice is always, especially for high school students, or later middle school students, is involving them in the process and helping them feel ownership of it. Um, so that's my vague political answer to your
No,
your
it's
question.
perfect because it makes sense. That's why we have an individualized IEP. It
Right.
shouldn't all be stamped. And the supplementary aids and services clarify location and manner. And
Hmm.
I know one of the things I've recently been doing for my older kids, when they say the task analysis, I'm like, okay, so you break it down to 5 steps. Is this a child that you give all 5 steps to at the same time and they can check through it? Or is this a child that you say, okay, we have 5 steps. Here's step one, and then when they finish step two, here's step two, and do it that way. Like, which every child's different. And so it's the same thing with the task analysis.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I would say that's really helpful and universally in this type of scenario is I have I developed this thing called the 6 master laws of executive function coaching. And one of them is progress is visualized. And that means the student has to see progress for the task to be meaningful for them. So for example, with what you're saying, where there's a 5-step task, analyze, process, that's important. And probably equally important is, can they check off each step of the way or cross it out so that they can see that the effort that they put in, even if one step is difficult or challenging, that they can somehow see, okay, I'm not at stage 1 still because I crossed out or checked off step 1. And that, like, there's so many ways you can do that. For example, if you're writing a book, like, you might do a word count and be like, okay, I've done 1,000 words a day. All right. I made progress. I'm not, because ultimately so much of executive functioning is understanding that you don't get an immediate reward from the behavior. I call it leading indicators versus lagging indicators. The lagging indicator is graduating high school or earning an A in the class. The leading indicator, the thing that you have to do first, is check your assignments, task initiate on that difficult thing. So we want to really create a system where we reinforce those leading indicators that lead to the lagging indicators that are like the demonstration of success, rather than the small, incremental behaviors students need to learn how to appreciate.
Yeah. It just makes it, sorry, I don't want to say mind blown, but it's like, it just gives me more things to think about. And I always laugh at this because, it's my show. I've been doing this a lot of years. I think I have like 140 something episodes, and every episode I learn something new, you
Yeah,
know?
that's awesome.
I have my undergrad in early childhood. I have my master's in special ed. I taught before. I'm an attorney
Wow.
now. But
Yeah.
like, opening up to allow yourself to hear other things, there's always something you can learn and how to improve.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I had a podcast for a period of time too, which was such a special experience. I describe it as learning out loud, because when you're truly passionate about the subject, which you clearly are, there's I call it like the infinite spiral. Like, you can never fully learn everything. Like, that's what I love about executive functioning is, one, we probably know so little about it already. I mean, there's a lot we know, and there's 40 years of research on it, but it's also, the brain is there anything more complex in the universe?
Right.
As far as I know, I don't know. And there's so much to learn. And so, like, I can totally relate to that. Like, it's just like,
Yeah.
it's something you can keep digging into further and further, and just kind of increase your sense of wonder around it.
Right. I love telling my kids, well, my kids love telling me I'm wrong. And I'm like, look, they're like, but you know everything. I'm like, no, I don't. Am I smart? Do I know a lot? Yes. Do I know everything? Not humanly possible. I
Yes.
couldn't do brain surgery, you know, like,
Not yet.
it's not, yeah, not yet. Exactly. Not yet. That's what we did in Girls on the Run the other day. It was like, I can't do this. I can't do it yet. And look back
Yeah.
at, yeah.
Well, one thing, for as we go into this, because it sounds like for you, and I think this is the attitude that we're trying to cultivate in students, is this sense of a never-ending learner. And, like, it sounds like for you, that's like something that really drives you. And I think one of the most important things we can cultivate in students is actually reframing or encouraging them to fail as much as you can. And I like the quote, failure is feedback, feedback is power, or feedback is information. So failure is feedback, feedback is information, and information is power, or knowledge is power. I kind of butchered that, but you get the idea. And it's basically like, we need to constantly fail in order to develop new skills. Like, that is the point of learning, at which we fail, at which knowledge breaks
Yeah.
down, and then we can learn something to fill the gap in where our knowledge. So if we're just operating off of a place of, I know everything, I'm never failing, which is what a lot of kids are scared to fail. They're scared to fail. They don't want to submit something if it's not perfect. That's like
Yeah.
the other side of executive functioning. The one side of it is just complete avoidance and not doing things. The other side is this perfection paralysis, which is really damaging to kids, because they don't realize, or they don't understand, that failure and iteration is actually critical to success, critical to displaying knowledge. Nothing ever comes out perfect. I mean, there's probably some examples in history where, like, first shot was just unbelievable, but 99% of the time, failure and this iterative growth is critical to, any type of achievement or success in life.
Yeah, and that's there, Edison did the light bulb, and I think he failed 99 times before he got it right, and
Yeah.
somebody asked him, like, "How did you deal with failing 99 times?" He's like, "I didn't fail 99 times. It took me 100 steps to develop the
Yeah,
light bulb.
I
Next
love that.
time, it'll take me less steps.
Yeah,
And it was just like, wow, yeah, that makes sense.
that's a great example. Yeah, that's a light bulb moment. I actually,
Yeah.
I keep this on my desk. It says failure, and I'm just like, How can I fail today?" Like, I'm really like, I'm trying to find a way to fail better every day because I just think it's so important, to like get
It's where
out
the
of, yeah.
It's okay to fail, and that's where the learning starts.
Mhm.
My daughter, so both of my kids are excel in math. It skipped my generation, but both sets of grandparents. And so she came home one day, my older one, and she had an F in math. I'm like, "You got an F in math?" She's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wasn't there the day of instruction, but I see where I did it wrong, and now I know how to do it, so it's all good."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "That's learning."
Yeah, yeah, that's a great attitude. Good for
And
her.
so, well, and because we're very strong in my house that, not that we don't care about grades, but you don't have to get straight A's. Are you
Yeah,
learning? Are you making growth? That's what's
yeah.
important.
I think that's a great attitude. I think when I think about grades, I do encourage them. I try to, I look at both grades and money in the same way, in that they are a neutral indicator of value. Now, there are, you know, exceptions to this. Like, there are certain teachers who are maybe unfair in grading, and that's not what I'm talking about. But in general, I would say grades and money are a neutral indicator of value. So they're a way for students to basically take action or have a hypothesis or ask, how can I work towards this grade, and get feedback, like, or money. Like, if no one buys the product that you're putting out, it might not be because you're like they're wrong. It might be that you need to adjust your product and make sure you listen to the customers more effectively. And so I do like, I try to encourage this, like, let's not completely disregard grades, because
Mhm.
they're a neutral indicator of performance, right? It's just like, for the most part, it's just like, okay, let's be curious about, what does the teacher expect from you in order to improve this, right? And instead of but I don't think they're the end all. And I think, like you said, it sounds like you guys have a very healthy relationship with grades in your home, which is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. She was telling me that one of her friends were teasing her, like, your parents don't care about you because they don't care if you get good grades. And she
Mm.
responded, my parents care more about my mental health.
Mm.
I'm
Okay,
like,
yeah,
win.
let's go. Yeah,
Right.
that's
So,
important.
yeah, it is. I mean, like, I remember growing up and, one of my siblings was a straight A student, like, took it nothing, like, she was just one of those students that could get straight A's all the time. And I would work hard for my B's, and my other sister would work hard for her C's.
Mhm.
And the A's always got rewarded. But I'm like, she put not even half the effort of the two of us. And so it was just, but that's the way it was when we were younger, that, the grade matters, not the effort behind the grade. And
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it sounds like everything worked out pretty well,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I was almost the opposite, where I got really good grades. I have ADHD, and so I was able to hyper focus and get really good grades with almost not too much effort. Like, I had to put in work, but I was really, especially with writing, I could communicate my ideas effectively. And so I was able to get really good grades even through college. But where my system broke down is that grades don't matter when you're like trying to like navigate getting a job, or networking, or whatever it might be. And so my whole academic career, I was so hyper focused on good grades that I never actually considered, like, why am I caring about grades? And so I left college, and I didn't have any type of transition plan, because from all, I guess, like, visibly, I was doing amazing, but I didn't actually have the executive functioning skills to consider, like, sure, grades are a piece of the equation, but also, like, what type of lifestyle, how much money do I want to be earning, like, where do I want to live, what type of service do I want to be doing? I didn't consider that. I was just like, I'm going to get great grades, and so it was a big learning lesson. And that's probably why I really fell in love with executive functioning and working with students, is because I didn't want other kids to hyper focus on something that looks good. It's like a visible marker of success, but does it really actually matter? Not as much as we think. Clarity and direction and purpose are much more important in the long run than just getting A's.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's, it's so funny how we link back to how we were. And I grew up thinking I wasn't smart because, I worked harder to get the grades. I couldn't do math like the rest of the family could do, and whatever. Um, Obviously, I went to law school. I'm pretty, I was on law
Yeah,
review. There's some brains in there. It's just
that's
different.
impressive.
Right.
That's
And
impressive.
so, thank you. And so I say all the time, like, why do I do what I do? I'm like, because I don't want kids with IEPs growing up thinking they're dumb, thinking they're stupid.
Yeah.
I want to focus on let's build up this child of like, yeah, you're struggling here. That's why we have an IEP in place. Let's build you up so that you're smart in different ways, and that's okay.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I think the IEP, when done properly, with care and with I've worked with some attorneys here in California, and when it's done right, man, it is like the most incredible tool to open doors and leverage education in a way that really supports the learner. I think it's really hard to do. It takes a lot of skill, and I can tell that you are a pro at it. Um, and that's just like amazing when a student gets access to the things they really need, especially a neurodivergent student who has probably been in a lot of environments that just do not cater to what they actually need. But so, as the program developer for neurodivergent, this conference you were mentioning, one of the speakers this year, Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, he's like, you may have heard of him. He's written 11 books. He was the director or founder of Columbia's Center for Human Development. He's like a professional magician, or he calls it a mentalist. Like, he can just do the most amazing things. He gave an incredible keynote this year, like standing ovation, blew the minds of everyone in the crowd. But anyways, he was telling this story of how he was in special education until he was 9. Like, they thought he was incapable. And then one year, a teacher came up to him and was like, "What are you still doing in here?" And he basically worked his way out of special ed by advocating for himself. And like his first step out of special ed was, he was like, "I want to take a bunch of AP classes," and they're like, "Nope, like that's not realistic, it's gonna be too hard." And he's like, "No, I really want to do it." They let him, and he just ended up doing incredible. And this guy is, like, I would say, like a genius in some respects. I mean, the things he can do are just mind-blowing to me. um but that's what I believe we have, lying dormant in many students, especially special education students, is there's incredible gifts, incredible humanity, but sometimes the system is just oppressing them, honestly, and it requires a really good IEP or special education process or teacher or team to unlock the beauty and power that is lying dormant. So I appreciate you, Francis, what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate you. So you said California, but I know do you do a lot of coaching and stuff virtually so that it's
Yeah, the whole
nationwide?
business is virtual. So we work with students throughout the world, mainly in the United States. But yeah,
Yeah. So if people want to learn more, want to talk to you more about any of your companies or, maybe engaging for executive functioning coaching, what's the
yeah,
best way for them to reach you?
yeah. Thank you, Francis. I appreciate it. Yeah. So probably the first place to start if you want coaching for students is EF Specialists, so executive function, but EF Specialists with an S at the end.com. There you can like look at our coaching. I also have like a shorter course for people who don't want to commit to coaching or it's too small, called the Semester Success Blueprint, which I created, which is basically just exactly how I would coach a student. So it's something that teachers, parents, educators could use to see like what is a process that's helped a lot of students learn how to manage school effectively. So that's a great place to start. And then if you're an educator who is interested in becoming a coach and wants to learn more about it, you can check out executivefunctioncoachingacademy.com. I wrote a book called From Educator to Executive Function Coach, which you can find on Amazon. And those are kind of the main places. And then for adults, we have Upskill Specialists, which I founded with another special education teacher, Eric Hoffman. So that's a business that focuses on working with neurodivergent adults.
That is awesome. And I know we'll have all the links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Sean, for coming on the show and sharing all of your words of wisdom. And I'm just so excited to start implementing all the new things that I learned.
You're welcome, Francis. Thank you for inviting me and hosting me. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad we got to have this chat. It was really fun.
So did I. Thank you, and thank you all for joining us on this episode of Stress Free IEP. We hope today's conversation gave you new tools, insight, or just a little more peace of mind as you support your neurodivergent child. Next week, we're going to have episode 142, where Rachel Greenberg is going to talk about helping kids build social and dating skills. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone in your village. You can always learn more about me at schefterlaw.com or follow along on social media. Until next time, remember, you do not have to do